The mind is indeed restless and most difficult to subdue. But as Krishna tells him, it is restrained by constant effort and giving up of all desire. Repeated endeavor to keep the mind steadily fixed on the object to which it should be dedicated is meditation, abhyas, whereas renunciation is the sacrifice of desire for, or attachment to, all seen as well as heard sense objects, which include pleasures of the world and also the promised joys of heaven. So although it is difficult to curb the mind, it can be subdued by constant meditation and renunciation. Therefore,
असंयतात्मना योगो दुष्प्राप इति मे मतिः वश्यात्मना तु यतता शक्यो वाप्तुमुपायतः.
It is my firm conviction that while the attainment of yoga is most difficult for a man who fails to restrain his mind, it is easy for him who is his own master and active in the performance of the required action. The achievement of yoga is not really so difficult as Arjuna has assumed. It is difficult, indeed impossible, for the man with an unrestrained mind, but it is within the reach of one who has disciplined his thoughts and feelings and is enterprising. So Arjuna should not abandon his endeavor for yoga just because of his fear that it is something impossible to achieve. Yet he responds rather despairingly to the encouragement, as we may see from his next question.
अयति श्रद्धयोपेतो योगाच्चलितमानसः अप्राप्य योगसंसिद्धिं कां गतिं कृष्ण गच्छति.
Arjuna said, "What is the end, O Krishna, of the acquiescent worshipper whose inconstant mind has strayed from selfless action and who has therefore been deprived of perception, which is the final outcome of yoga?" Not all worshippers are rewarded with success in their attempt to achieve yoga, although this does not mean that they have no faith in it. The practice of yoga is often disrupted by the restless mind. But what happens to men who wished to be yogis but did not succeed because of their fickle minds?
कच्चिन्नो भयविभ्रष्टः छिन्नाभ्रमिव नश्यति अप्रतिष्ठो महाबाहो विमूढो ब्रह्मणः पथि.
Is it, O the mighty-armed Arjuna, that this deluded man with no haven to turn to is destroyed like scattered clouds, deprived of both self-realization and worldly pleasures? Is this man truly like scattered patches of clouds because his mind is divided and he is confused? If a small patch of cloud appears in the sky, it can neither precipitate rain nor join other clouds, and within moments the wind destroys it. Very much similar to this puny, isolated cloud appears the passive and unpersevering man who begins with an enterprise and then discontinues his efforts. Arjuna wishes to be enlightened on what finally happens to such a man. Is he destroyed? If so, he has missed both self-realization and worldly enjoyment. But what is his final end?
एतन्मे संशयं कृष्ण छेत्तुमर्हस्य शेषतः त्वदन्यः संशयस्यास्य छेत्ता न ह्युपपद्यते.
You, O Krishna, are the most capable of fully resolving this doubt of mine, because I cannot think of anyone else who can do it. The ardor of Arjuna's faith is remarkable. He is convinced that only Krishna can dispel his doubts. No one else can do it. So the accomplished teacher Krishna begins to resolve his devout pupil's misgivings.
पार्थ नैवेह नामुत्र विनाशस्तस्य विद्यते न हि कल्याणकृत् कश्चिद् दुर्गतिं तात गच्छति.
The Lord said, "This man, O Parth, is destroyed neither in this world nor in the next, because, my brother, one who performs good deeds never comes to grief." Arjuna is here addressed as Parth, because, as we have already seen, he has turned his mortal body itself into a chariot to proceed to his goal. And now Krishna tells him that the man who deviates from yoga because of his mind's fickleness is not destroyed in this world or in the next. This is so because a doer of good deeds, of God-related deeds, is never damned. However, what is his destiny?
प्राप्य पुण्यकृतान् लोकान् उषित्वा शाश्वती समाः शुचीनां श्रीमतां गेहे योगभ्रष्टोऽभिजायते.
The righteous man who deviates from the path of yoga achieves celestial merits and pleasures for countless years, after which he is reborn in the house of a virtuous and noble man, or fortunate and thriving man. What a paradox that the man who has fallen from yoga enjoys in the worlds of the virtuous satisfaction of the same desires for sensual pleasure by which his restless mind was lured away from the appointed way in the mortal world. But this is God's synoptic way of providing him a glimpse of all he wanted, after which he is reborn in the house of a noble man, a man of righteous conduct, or a man of fortune.
अथवा योगिनामेव कुले भवति धीमताम् एतद्धि दुर्लभतरम् लोके जन्म यदीदृशम्.
Or he is admitted to the family, kul, of discerning yogi, and such a birth is truly the most rare in the world. If the deviating soul is not reborn in the house of a virtuous or affluent man, he is granted a birth which provides him admission to the family of a yogi. In the households of noble men, righteous influences are imbibed right from childhood. But, if not reborn in such houses, he gains admission not to the house of a yogi, but to his kul, as one of his pupils. Such were men like Kabir, Tulsidas, Raidas, Valmiki, and others like them, who, though not born in the houses of noble and affluent men, were admitted as pupils to the families of yogi. A birth in which the merits, sanskar, inherited from a previous life, are further refined by association with an accomplished teacher, a realized sage, is indeed the most rare. Being born to the yogi does not mean being born as their physical offspring. Well might children born to a yogi, before he had given up home and hearth, regard him out of attachment as father. But in truth, a sage has no one whom he can regard as his family. 100 times the concern he has for his own children is the concern a realized sage has for his faithful and obedient pupils. They, the pupils of the accomplished teacher, are his real children. Accomplished teachers do not admit pupils who are not endowed with the requisite sanskar. If my revered teacher, Maharajaji, were inclined to converting people into sadhus, he could have had thousands of disenchanted men as his pupils. But he sent all the supplicants back home, paying fare to some of them by intimating and writing letters to families in other cases, and sometimes by persuasion. He had inauspicious omens if some of the contenders were adamant on being admitted as pupils. An inner voice cautioned him that they were wanting in the qualities that make a sadhu, and so he rejected them. Smarting under unbearable disappointment, a couple of the supplicants even resorted to the extreme step of taking their own life. Notwithstanding all this, Maharajaji would not admit pupils he did not find spiritually equipped to receive and profit by his teaching. After learning of the suicide by one he had rejected, he said, "I knew he was terribly alarmed, but I did not know he would kill himself. Had I known this, I would have taken him. For what greater harm could have been in that, except that he would have persisted as a sinner?" The revered Maharajaji was a man of great compassion, and yet he did not accept unworthy pupils. He admitted in all only about 6 pupils, about whom he had been told by his inner voice, "Today you are going to meet one who has fallen from yoga. He has been groping about for several births. This is his name, and this is how he looks. Accept him when he comes, impart the knowledge of God to him, and support him in his journey along the path." So he accepted only these chosen few. That his intuitions were correct may be seen from the fact that from among his chosen disciples we now have a sage living at Darkundi, another one at Ansuya, and 2 or 3 others who are engaged in the service of mankind elsewhere. They are all men who were admitted as pupils to the family of an accomplished teacher. To be blessed with a birth which provides such opportunity is indeed a most rare event.
तत्र तं बुद्धिसंयोगं लभते पौर्वदेहिकं यतते च ततो भूयः संसिद्धौ कुरु नन्दन.
He naturally bears with him into his new birth the noble impressions, sanskar, of yoga from his previous existence, and by dint of this he strives well for perfection that comes from the realization of God. The merits he had earned in his previous body are spontaneously restored to him in his new birth, by virtue of which he sets out to achieve the ultimate excellence that is God.
पूर्वाभ्यासेन तेनैव ह्रियते ह्यवशोऽपि सः जिज्ञासुरपि योगस्य शब्दब्रह्माति वर्तते.
Although he is lured by objects of sense, the merits of his previous life indeed draw him towards God, and his aspiration for yoga enables him to go beyond the material rewards promised by the Ved. If he is born in a noble or thriving household, and is subject to the influence of sense objects, the traces of virtuous deeds inherited from his previous life yet draw him to the way that leads to God, and even with inadequate endeavor, he is enabled to rise above the fruits mentioned by Vedic compositions and attain to the state of salvation. This is the way of achieving the ultimate liberation. But this cannot be within a single life.
प्रयत्नाद्यतमानस्तु योगी संशुद्ध किल्बिषः अनेकजन्म संसिद्धः ततो याति परां गतिम्.
The yogi who has purified his heart and mind through several births by intense meditation, and thus rid himself of all sins, attains to the ultimate state of realizing God. Only an endeavor made over a number of lives effects this ultimate accomplishment. The yogi who practices diligent meditation is well rid of all kinds of impiety and then attains to the final beatitude. This is the way of attainment. Setting out on the path of yoga with but a feeble effort, and initiated into it when the mind is yet restless, he is admitted to the family of an accomplished teacher, and with the undertaking of meditation in life after life, he at last arrives at the point called salvation, the state in which the soul is merged into God. Krishna also said before that the seed of this yoga is never annihilated. If we take just a couple of steps, the merits earned from them are never destroyed. A man of true faith can embark upon the ordained action in every circumstance of worldly life. The Gita is for all mankind, for the man devoted to his family and the sannyasi, the educated and the unlettered, and for everyone. It is not only for that unique creature called a sadhu. This indeed is Lord Krishna's pronouncement.
तपस्विभ्योऽधिको योगी ज्ञानिभ्योऽपि मतोऽधिकः कर्मिभ्यश्चाधिको योगी तस्माद् योगी भवार्जुन.
Since yogi are superior to men who do penance, or men who follow the path of knowledge discrimination, or men who desire the fruits of action, O Kurunandan, you should be a doer of selfless action. A yogi, doer of selfless action, surpasses all ascetics and men of knowledge as well as those of action. So Krishna's final counsel to Arjuna is that he should be a yogi. This necessitates an appraisal of what all these types are. The ascetic, tapasvi, is one who practices severe austerities and mortifications of the body, mind, and senses to shape the yoga which has not yet started flowing through him like an unimpeded current. The doer, or karmi, is one who is engaged in the ordained task after knowing it, but who applies himself to it without either making an appraisal of his own strength or a sense of dedication. He is just engaged in the carrying out of an enterprise. The man of knowledge, jnani, follower of the way of knowledge, is engaged in the performance of the deed of yajna only after gaining a full understanding of the process from a noble mentor, an accomplished teacher, as well as with a clear appraisal and judgment of his own strength. He holds himself responsible for both profit and loss in the undertaking. The yogi, doer of selfless action, performs the same prescribed task of meditation with a sense of total surrender to the Adored One. The responsibility for the success of his yoga is borne by God and the Yogeshwar. Even when there are prospects of failure, he has no fear, because the God whom he craves for has taken upon himself the task of supporting and upholding him. All the four types of action are noble as such, but the ascetic, the man of penance, is still engaged in equipping himself for yoga. The doer, the man of action, engages in action just because he knows that it has to be undertaken. These two may fail because they have neither a sense of dedication nor a proper discernment of their assets and liabilities. But the follower of the way of knowledge is aware of the means of yoga and also of his own strength. He holds himself responsible for whatever he does. And the yogi, the doer of selfless action, has cast himself at the mercy of his adored God, and it is God who will protect and help him. Both of these tread well on the path of spiritual salvation. But the way on which the safety of the worshipper is looked after by God is the superior of the two. It is acknowledged by Krishna. So the yogi is the most superior of men, and Arjuna ought to be a yogi. He should engage in the task of performing yoga with a sense of complete resignation. The yogi is superior, but even better is that yogi who dwells in God through his self. The last words of Krishna in the chapter are about this.
योगिनामपि सर्वेषां मद्गतेनान्तरात्मना श्रद्धावान् भजते यो मां समे युक्ततमो मतः.
Among all yogi, I think that one the best, who is dedicated to me, and who, abiding in the self, always adores me. Krishna regards, among all yogi, doers of selfless action, that one as the best who, immersed in his feelings of devotion, always adores him. Worship is not a matter of display or exhibition. Society may approve of such display, but God is offended. Worship is a secret, private activity, and it is undertaken within the heart. The ascent and descent of worship are events that belong to the innermost seats of thought and feeling. Conclusion. Yogeshwar Krishna says at the beginning of the chapter that the man who performs the ordained worthwhile task is a sannyasi. The yogi is also a doer of the same action. One does not become a yogi or a sannyasi just by giving up lighting of fire or undertaking of action. No one can be a sannyasi or yogi without sacrificing desires. We are not rid of will just by claiming that we do not have it. The man who wishes to possess yoga should do what ought to be done, for freedom from desires comes only by a repeated and constant undertaking of this action, and never before it. Renunciation is complete absence of desire. Arjuna should be a yogi. With true dedication to Krishna, he should accomplish yoga within his heart and mind. Thus, in the chapter, Krishna has chiefly stressed the importance of meditation for the attainment of yoga. Thus concludes the 6th chapter in the Upanishad of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita on the knowledge of the Supreme Spirit, the science of yoga, and the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna entitled Abhyas Yoga, or the Yoga of Meditation. Thus concludes Swami Adgaranand's exposition of the 6th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in Yatharth Geeta. Hari Om Tat Sat.